From Hollywood's decision to tell a decidedly different tale of the frontier, to national doubts about next year's Columbus quincentennial celebration, to the still-raging controversy over the Atlanta Braves and the tomahawk chop, this is a year in which a Native American point of view has reached a larger audience than perhaps ever before. Good evening, I'm Kevin Berger. Tonight we'll hear more Native voices and look at what it means to be a Native American in Minnesota in 1991. What it means to hold on to one's identity amid the pressures of American society, as we look through the eyes of three individuals. Then we'll examine those issues and others, racism, education, and leadership, with Native and non-Native Americans in a town meeting live in our studios in St. Paul and Bemidji. And we also hope to hear from you. Stay with us for this edition of KTCA Reports.
Major funding for this edition of KTCA Reports is provided by the McKnight Foundation, responding to the needs of individuals and communities. The Pillsbury Foundation, focusing on programs serving children and youth at risk, and the Northwest Area Foundation. Additional funding is provided by the James R. Thorpe Foundation, the Grotto Foundation, and by the Archie D. and Bertha H. Walker Foundation.
Dakota, Winnebago, Anishinaabe, Lakota, Mdewakanton, Oneida. Those are among the tribes represented in our audience here and in Bemidji. The names familiar to those in the Native American community might seem strange to white Americans, though it's become somewhat trendy to dabble in Native spirituality or art. Most non-Native Americans are still largely ignorant of the reality and diversity of Native American life. We hope to sample that diversity tonight. But first, we will meet three individuals. They are living the reality in their own lives as we watch and listen to Diary, Native American Minnesotans, produced by KTCA's Robert Byrd.
Long before European immigrants settled in America and eventually made their way to the Midwest, there were scores of native people living on the area of land that we now call Minnesota. Today, there are 50,000 Native Americans in Minnesota. with 85% representing the Ojibwe tribe, 10% the Lakota, and the remaining 5% belonging to over 200 other tribes. An increasing number of these people have concluded that American society has done little to meet their moral and cultural needs, and they've chosen to go back to the traditions and values of their ancestors, like Joe Gishik, an artist whose studio is in the heart of downtown St. Paul. Joe's road to success as a painter was riddled with obstacles that he found difficult to overcome. 17 of his adolescent and adult years were spent in jails and prisons throughout the state. And it wasn't until much later in life that he finally realized the true source of his troubles.
When I think back, when I was living up on the Indian reservation, I remember us kids going out into the woods playing cowboys and Indians, and nobody really wanted to be the Indian. Everybody wanted to be the cowboy or the soldier, cavalry. And one of the games we used to play quite a bit was the Lone Ranger. And I remember we used to almost fight over who would be the Lone Ranger. It was that kind of a thing. I found myself trying to be somebody else.
And that somebody else in Joe's mind was more a reflection of white America than his Ojibwe roots as an American Indian. But it was much later in life, after years of self-abuse and abusive treatment toward others, that he came to that realization. During his final prison term, with the help of an Indian man named Martin Highbear, Joe's life began to change.
Martin was a Sioux medicine man from South Dakota, Eagle Butte, South Dakota. And he's been working with people in the prison system for quite a while. I told him that I was very concerned about what was going on in my life. I was getting fed up with the idea that I was hurting people, I was hurting my family, people who were close to me. So I was very concerned about that, and I sat down and talked to him, and what he said at that time was I needed to go back home. I told him, I said, I can't go back home. You see, I took it for granted that he meant going back to the reservation. And I didn't want to go back to the reservation because over there was a lot of drinking, a lot of violence, and I didn't want that. So what he meant was that I needed to go back to the old ceremonies and start over. And now that I look back at that conversation we had, what he was saying was that I needed to get back to the roots of my life, the roots of the ceremonies. In other words, I needed to go back and reconnect myself spiritually, using ceremonies, people like himself, for guidance, for direction.
Martin was able to provide Joe with the guidance that he desperately needed by pointing him back in time to the ancient ceremonial customs of his people. And it was through this discovery that Joe's life took on new meaning, and his artistic talents began to flourish.
It is my responsibility as a human being to be a part in bettering our environment on a spiritual level and on a physical level, and also to protect young people, to help young people as much as possible. So the message that comes through a lot of my paintings are spiritual. It's very important for us to respect the old procedures of the ceremonies we have. Because to me, that's all we have left.
Jim Northrup is an Anishinaabe writer and poet living on the Fond du Lac Reservation in Cloquet. And like Joe Gishik, he's returned to the cultural values and traditions of his elders.
It seems that the Indian people had their customs and traditions before the white man came. And then it went through a long period where they tried to adapt to the white way of life, the materialistic way of doing things. The use it and throw it away mentality. But through it all, there have been elders around to teach us that that is not the right way to live. The right way to live is the way the old people lived, the ones that lived here for thousands of years, who were able to live on this continent without turning it into a big garbage dump. And so a lot of people my age and younger are returning to the old ways, the old beliefs, and I think that's a good thing. I realize that we can't be just dark-skinned Americans. We have to be who we are.
You mentioned earlier that for a while Native American people attempted to live in the white world and embrace the white way of life. Why do you think that, first of all, they did that, and why do you think that it failed?
I think they did it for the same reason you turn your back to the wind when the rain and the snow are coming down really hard. You just bow before the wind. But then you realize that it's easier to get away from the wind by going into a shelter of some kind rather than standing there like a dumb cow and bowing before the wind. So we realize that the American values and the American traditions sound good on paper, and they sound good when the politicians are talking about them. But when you see the way they're practiced in real life, there's a world of difference. So I think a lot of Native people have said no to the hypocrisy that's so common in America today. We've tried the American dream, and it turned out to be a nightmare. America, the American dream, isn't working for us. But yet we're exposed to it every day on the television, on the newspaper, in the magazines we read. We don't see the real life. We don't see the way it really is. Just once I'd like to see a television program that photographed the people sitting in a restaurant when I walk in with my wife. That almost physical feeling you get from seeing a group of white people staring at you. Sometimes I put my finger on top of my head and give them a 360, give them an overall view of who I am. You can almost hear them saying, "Oh my God, Marge, there's two of them." I see this more around the reservation than I do the farther away I get from it. We are strong because we have our identity. I feel sorry for the people that don't have identities, and that would include most of white America. That's why we see so many of them coming to our ceremonies, coming to our gatherings, to try to be a culture vulture and take a little bit of what we have. And I think it's sad that they can't be happy with pushing a lawnmower or looking at their watch or whatever the icons of their culture are. But yet, we don't turn them away. We hope that maybe they will learn a little something from us, a little something that'll help them survive on this continent also.
What about your notion, the Native notion of sharing, as in sharing land? Would it be your objective, for example, to see all non-Native Americans get out of this country and give it back to Native Americans?
Ideally, if they returned it to the condition it was in, that wouldn't be a bad idea. But realistically, I think it wouldn't happen. I think I would like them to instead adopt the idea that the land is ours to use, not to own. And these artificial barriers of state lines, county lines, private property lines, no trespassing signs, if they could get rid of all of that, I think we'd all be happier.
So then you'd be willing to share?
Yes, yes, it's the way I was raised, to share. If I shoot a deer and I know that my neighbor doesn't have much to eat, it's a cultural duty for me to give that neighbor part of my deer meat or my rice or whatever I have extra of. And that's the way I was raised, and that's the way I'm hoping to raise my children. Not only by telling them, but by showing them, by example.
To what extent do you discuss cultural traditions with your son?
It happens on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis. Sometimes I show him the lake and let him know that that's a gift to us from the Creator. If we use it wisely, if we don't pollute it or degrade it, it'll be ours for his children to use. So sharing our cultures, our beliefs with our children is a daily, if not hourly, happening.
What about storytelling?
Storytelling is important because it teaches the values and traditions of the people. Sharing, respect for others, respect for what the Creator gave us, those are the things that I want him to learn. I want all my children to learn. And anyone else who needs learning.
Jim learned the customs which he now passes on to his son from elders who took great care in teaching him the cultural values of the Anishinaabe people.
My elder doesn't come up and say, don't do this, don't do that. He tells me, you're not supposed to do that. So that leaves me the choice on whether I want to live according to the old ways or not. It isn't an autocratic kind of teaching. You're given the choice on whether you want to live the way you're supposed to live or not. To me, that spells freedom. I think we are freer than any other group of people.
How have these teachings from others shaped you, Jim Northrup, the individual? Your way of thinking, the morality by which you govern your life, the principles that you pass on to your children?
It's hard to define because it's the same as breathing. I don't think about my breathing, I just do it. So it's so deeply ingrained in me that it's hard to define. And I can only hope to teach my children and my grandchildren by example.
Tell me how you personally feel about tolerance. Tolerance of others, tolerance of those who are different, tolerance of different beliefs, different religions. Let's touch on that.
I was raised to be tolerant of others, to respect other people, even if what they were doing was completely opposed to what I was doing or the way I was brought up to believe. And that's the only way that I can get people to respect me, is to respect them. I can't convert anyone to my way of thinking. I don't think it's my place to do that. But if I can treat others with respect, then I will get respect in return. The Creator made us all. The Creator made everything around us. So I worship the Creator by the ceremonies and rituals that I use, the things that give me meaning in my life. Other people believe differently than I do. Even other tribes believe differently than I do. And that's fine. Whatever people believe, if it gives them strength, if it's not used in a destructive way, that's fine with me. I've been taught to respect other people's beliefs, their religions, their values. It doesn't mean I have to accept them. It doesn't mean I have to believe that way, just that I have to respect them.
For a long period in Jim's life, this nearly unconditional respect for others even applied to the United States government. But in 1965, his feelings for the government began to change, for that was the year that he went to Vietnam.
Up until the Vietnam War, even though the U.S. government did terrible things to Indians, I still believed in the democratic ideals, and I believed in the U.S. government. But after seeing it in action in Vietnam, I lost my virginity. I no longer believed in the U.S. government. Mom's apple pie, the American flag, all of those became meaningless symbols. I went to Vietnam in September of 1965. At the time, I had spent 4 years in the Marine Corps as an infantryman, training for war. It seemed like the natural thing to do. Coming from a long line of warriors, going back to when our people were fighting the Sioux and the other Indian tribes, I knew I was just another one of the long line of warriors in the family. For me, it was more of a personal mission. After being told all my life by the surrounding white people that I was no good because I was an Indian, I found it gratifying to know that I was doing something that took a lot of courage. I found out that I wasn't a coward. When people shoot at me, I shoot back. So it gave me a chance to prove myself to myself, not to the other people around me, but to myself. After 20-some years of a negative message about my role in society as an Indian, going to Vietnam gave me a chance to prove that I was just as good as anyone else.
And once you were there, how did you feel?
First of all, I was struck by the similarity between the Vietnamese people and our people. Almost the same color skin, hair. The long hair, especially on the women, brought back a lot of memories from my youth, looking at my parents, my grandparents, and all my relatives with long hair, long black hair. I was struck by that similarity, and actually the spirit of the Vietnamese people, compared to the Western standards, they lived a low standard of living, but yet they seemed to survive.
So you developed a kinship with the Vietnamese people?
Yes, I did. Not with all of them, but with some of them I could talk to. I always found it interesting that at different points in Vietnam, the Vietnamese people would come up and speak their language to me and expect me to answer in Vietnamese, as if they took me for one of their own.
So after having developed that kinship, how did you feel about fighting in the war and fighting the Vietnamese?
I don't think I thought about it as much as I thought about the guy in the next foxhole who was wearing a green uniform like I was wearing. I think that was more important to me than any political kinds of thoughts or any kinship feeling with the Vietnamese. The guy in the next hole, whether he was a black man, a Chicano, a white man, made no difference. He was wearing the same green that I was wearing, and he was exposed to the same conditions that I was. So I felt closer to him than anyone else. The war had a way of leveling everyone off. An artillery shell is pretty indiscriminate when it comes in. It doesn't matter when it goes off whether it's tearing apart white Americans, black Americans, Mexican Americans, or, as I call us, American Americans.
Did you form any good friendships while you were there?
Some real brief, intense friendships, yes. Because it was such a chaotic experience, you didn't know from one day to the next or even 1 hour to the next if the person that you were calling your friend would be there or not. So they were brief friendships, real intense, so people that you could trust your life with.
Jim's tour of duty in Vietnam left such an indelible mark on his life that he wrote a book of poetry about the pain and anguish of his experience with war.
Were you in the war?
Yes,
What was it like?
like nothing you can imagine.
Did you kill anyone?
Yes,
How did you feel?
I felt like a murderer, a savior, a cog in a machine.
Did any of your friends get killed?
Yes,
How did that feel?
get the hell out of my face.
In hindsight, how do you feel about that war, and how do you feel about fighting it for the United States?
I learned a lot about myself. I learned that I'm not a coward. I'm not going to cut and run when my life is in danger. And I learned that I can put up with just about anything. In hindsight, I realized that I was meat for the grinder. I was a member of a recognizable ethnic group that is noted for their willingness to fight. I realized that I was just new meat for them, and the United States is continuing to go on and consume people who are usually poor or from minority groups to fight their wars. I try to keep as far away from the United States and its institutions as possible. The American people, individually, I can get along with any one of them. We have the same basic human needs and desires. But when you get an American in a position of power or in a group, there's just no dealing with them. They begin to think like a mob or a herd rather than as an individual, and it's just difficult for me as an individual to deal with them.
What does that mean in terms of your future, the future of your children, the future of this land, the future of the Native American people?
I think it's my cultural duty to teach my children how to live in the white world, how to get along in the white world, and yet retain their identity as Anishinaabe. It would be nice if there were only Anishinaabe in America, but realistically we know that's not going to happen, so I have to teach them how to get along. I have to teach them of the white value system, the power structure, and how things work in the real world.
What does life mean to you, Jim?
A chance to do something good. As men, we're here just a short period of time. You look at this rock here. It's been here for millions of years. And what is the lifespan of a human compared to the life of that rock? Being alive, living your life the good way, gives you a chance to do good things in your life.
In the city of Minneapolis, Brenda St. Germain has also set out to do good things with her life. As the executive director of the American Indian Development Corporation, she and a dedicated group of board members and volunteers have provided the impetus for change on the eastern end of Franklin Avenue.
Initially, when we came together as just a group of a few people in 1974, we were concerned about the deterioration on Franklin Avenue, lack of jobs, just the lack of attention from anyone. We came together with the main focus of job creation for that neighborhood and to bring new businesses into that area. Initially, we thought we were going to do a factory in 1974. It turned out that we did not.
What was it about Franklin that inspired you to change the look of that avenue?
Well, previously, I worked there a couple years in a chemical dependency program. A friend of mine worked in the State Economic Development Office under Mark Dayton, and she was charged with Indian business development. We became friendly, and we would hang out on Franklin. I worked right there, and I think we just got tired of it. It was boarded up buildings, there was unemployment, there were no jobs, there were no businesses. We had bars, X-rated theater. There was nothing there for people. I remember driving down with her one day and just saying, God, I'm sick of looking at this. There was just never anything new, never any change, and the city wasn't doing anything. We referred to Franklin Avenue back then as the dumping ground for the city. If you had a second-hand shop or had a social service hand out something, or the X-rated theater, if you had something you wanted to get rid of, you put it on Franklin Avenue, and we felt that that was the attitude of the city back then, and so did the community.
So in 1974, Brenda and a small group of other volunteers rallied together to change the look of Franklin Avenue, which was no easy task, especially considering that they had no money to work with. But in 1977, things began to change. They received their first grant from the Minneapolis Foundation for $10,000.
So you were still basically a volunteer organization with a little seed money.
Yeah, the board was, I was on paid staff for probably 9 months, a year at that period, doing proposals, trying to get something going because I believed in what we wanted to do. And we were making progress. We had contacts with the federal government. We started doing our research. We started doing things that needed to be done in order to fulfill the grant requirements so we could apply for a large grant for construction. But it was a slow, very slow process.
But it was a process that paid off. In 1979, the American Indian Development Corporation received $1 million grant and $1 million loan from the federal government. It was well on its way to building the Franklin Circle Shopping Center, a 2-block complex offering essential goods and services and 90 new jobs to people in the area. Brenda and her board members were not content to stop there. In 1989, they teamed with the city of Minneapolis to open yet another new complex, the Franklin Business Center.
The business center is called a small business incubator, and it's a building designed to grow businesses. It's not just a building where people have an office and pay rent. It's an incubator to grow businesses so they in turn can create jobs in the community. And our job as staff is to nurture these tenants that we have. We have 20 companies operating now. Everything we do is for the tenant. One of my tenants that we're coming up to is an Indian-owned company called G&B2. They started with 2 people in a 1,200 square foot space, and they have now expanded up to about 15 employees. They've taken over 5 different spots in the building, and this is exactly the kind of company that we're trying to promote in this neighborhood. We need companies that create jobs for unskilled people. This company does a lot of assembly. They do a lot of inspections, parts inspections, shrink wrapping, and they're hiring exclusively from this neighborhood, and they're just a great example of what we would like to do here.
What did you personally get out of this? What motivated you?
Well, and I've been asked this a lot, and I think about it, and I think initially I thought that I would be involved here for a couple years, try to do some good in the world. You know, I went through the 60s. We all wanted to change the world and do all kinds of things, and we thought we could, and some of us can. I want a better life for people. I have that kind of personality where I'm a helper. I want things better for the world. If I can make a little mark, terrific. And now it's been 16 years that I've been out doing this. I'm the type of person who also finishes. You know, I couldn't ever just leave in the middle. There were times when we were so frustrated. We lost grants, we lost tenants, we lost city support, we lost everything. This thing drug on for years. But you can't just quit, you're almost there. It's that kind of feeling. So I like what I do. I like people, I like making things better, I like helping people. I don't know, I just have that kind of motivation to try to make things better for my little part of the world.
What are your dreams for the future for Franklin Avenue and for that entire community?
I'd like to see Franklin Avenue become a part of town that's a real, I don't know if I want to say tourist attraction, but a different kind of neighborhood that has the image of let's go down there and let's go to some of those restaurants and let's go to the Indian pottery shop and the Indian museum and the art gallery and the Indian Center, and just a place that invites people from outside of the neighborhood to come in and visit what's going on there. Just one of those cultural centers. I think it'd be just neat. And I can see Franklin Avenue doing that with the diversity of people we have. I could just see it becoming a real melting pot of activity. And I'd like to see that happen.
After 16 years of struggling to be taken seriously, Brenda has a proven track record of making her dreams come true. She and her board of directors have already drawn up plans for another 8,000 square foot office building to be located across the street from the Franklin Business Center. With this sort of tenacity, it's only a matter of time before Franklin Avenue is transformed into the cultural renaissance that Brenda St. Germain has envisioned. In Minnesota, as well as the rest of the nation, today's Native Americans are warriors of a different sort. Many view themselves as fighting a more subtle battle of words and politics, all in an effort to be acknowledged as respectable human beings. And although they believe that their struggle is not yet won, they hope to avoid passing it on to their children.
So I don't want you to go to war. You don't have to. I did it already.
The documentary has left us with some haunting images, and it has also raised many issues, which we hope to discuss in the next hour. Joining us in our questioning tonight is Tom Beaver. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much. I enjoy being here. Well, one of the first people we're going to talk with tonight would be Brenda St. Germain, who is helping redevelop the... stand up, please. Thank you. Brenda, you talked about bringing up a new building in Franklin Avenue, and it seems that in these hard economic times, it's going to be difficult to come up with another building. And is that a realistic thing to do?
Well, it's always been difficult to come up with a new building on Franklin Avenue, but next year's going to be a real treat. Our building is running out of room. Our companies are really doing good stuff, and they're tripling in size. They're hiring from the neighborhood. We need more room. I don't know what's going to happen. The recession right now is kind of scary. What we're going to try to do is take control of several vacant buildings on Franklin so I can have room for some of my companies to expand, and then we'll see what the world does to me. I don't know what the financial world's going to do.
How does it look for the community with your help? Has it worked real well?
Well, I like to think that we've done some good out there. We're creating jobs for people. We have 150 jobs at least in my building, the second one. First one has about 90. We have 20 companies operating. We have many Indian companies that have just grown phenomenally. One company 2 weeks ago got a new contract, tripled in size, hired 25 Indian people in one day. It was people who were not employed before. It was just great. So I like to think we're doing some good for some people.
Let me ask you, Lee. This is Lee Cook from Augsburg. You have lived on a reservation and in the urban areas too. Is it harder in the city?
I think if not for Indians in the city, we wouldn't have an Indian Renaissance. The Indian Renaissance, the Indian cultural traditions and values that are espoused in all of our state and all of our country didn't start on the reservation because we were there oppressed by government agencies that didn't allow that to happen. It took people and militant Indians and activist Indians in the cities all over the United States. That's created the new kind of tradition, the new kind of Renaissance, and the new kind of Indian choices. I mean, all the people we saw in the film were people that now have choices, not only about what they do, but what kind of Indian life they want to live. We didn't have a choice about a life, where we want to live, what we ate, what kind of medical care we wanted, up until really 25 years ago. So I think the people that you're seeing are products of a lot of activity, a lot of activism, a lot of militancy that didn't begin on reservations. It began in cities like Minneapolis. And lots of the things we're seeing all across the country began here in Minneapolis. And some of the people in the audience that are here, Clyde and others, are people that, the warriors, modern warriors, that made things like this possible for the people in our movie and the people sitting in this audience.
Do people disagree with that? That it's the city activism that has changed things and provided these choices? Anybody disagree with that?
Please stand up here.
I think one of the things that's happened is what Lee Cook has so well explained. However, after the movement sort of developed beginning in 1968 and early 70s in the various urban communities, that many of our young people then gravitated back toward the reservations where the elders, where the clan mothers, the traditional spiritual leaders, those elders who maintain an understanding and a practice of the spiritual ceremonies. And in most cases, the young people going from the cities were embraced by these people, and that gave the real strong spiritual and cultural underpinning to the movement. So I have to agree with that, but to also add that particular dimension, because back in the hills of South Dakota and up in northern Minnesota on the different reservations, there were always those people that carried on the traditions, collected the rice, collected the maple sugar, knew the natural medicines that we needed to have good health. And in going back to that, it's like the University of Life, where many of our young people then had that opportunity. And I think that's a very important dimension.
We have been talking about the reservation. Though not all Native Americans in the state live within them, there are a number of Native American reservations or home places that are considered here in Minnesota. And as we mentioned earlier, tonight we are joined by a panel at public station KAWE-TV in Bemidji, which is located near several reservations. We'd like to bring in our Bemidji guests into our discussion. We're going to begin with Judy Roy, who's on the Tribal Council of the Red Lake Nation.
No.
Good evening, Judy. Can you hear me?
Okay. You're going to cost me my job. I'm not on the Tribal Council. I'm the executive administrator for the Tribal Council, so I need to get that clear right away.
What do you think of this discussion? Is it easier to keep the culture on the reservation in the city? What do you find?
Well, I've only ever been a reservation Indian, so I really can't speak to it from the urban perspective. It is, those are kind of fighting words, I guess, to reservation Indians, but I don't think we're here to squabble. I think we're here to celebrate the three people who have made such impressive improvements with the jobs they're doing in their lives. And yeah, I think there's room for both of us. We've made different choices, and I think there's work to be done all around.
Some of that work is done at Bemidji State University, where there's now an Indian Studies department at BSU. We have two people who are with BSU, Kent Smith and Don Day. Can either of you gentlemen address why there's a need for Indian Studies and how young people are gravitating to it? Who wants to learn more, and what can you teach them?
Well, I guess the need for Indian Studies was perceived in the late 1960s. It was at a time when there was an increasing interest in matters of Indian culture after generations of schools, churches, government institutions moving us away from our roots and our traditions. The young people who were involved in the movements in the 60s, I think, were the primary forces in the creation of Indian Studies programs, not only at Bemidji, but the University of Minnesota. And a lot of those programs came out of the activism in the 60s. I don't believe I never have believed that as Indian Studies programs we could ever impart fully traditional culture. You have to live that. It's something you can learn about on the university campus, but you can't really live it there. To live it, you have to be on the land. You have to be speaking the language. And all we're providing, I think, in the way I look at it, is an introduction to Indian ways. And we hope that our students will grow from there to move into their language and their traditions, to go back to the elders, to ground themselves, and then to move out into the world. There are many problems that we as Indian people face that are being addressed by these remarkable people we've seen earlier. We need more of those people who can spread the message. You know, we're faced with some really serious problems today with the environment, with racism, with the business climate, and the effects that those have on the reservations. And we need those people who are grounded in their traditions, yet who have an awareness of the the workings of the mainstream culture. And I think that's the purpose we serve, is to provide an introduction to both.
One of your students is there with you. This is Ida Braveheart, who's a student at Bemidji State. Good evening to you, Ida. Are you relating to some of these things that he says?
Yes, I am. I'm a senior and I'm majoring in elementary education. As a student, it's real important for me to be a role model for Native children, particularly Anishinaabe children.
Having role models?
Pardon?
Do you think they have enough role models right now, good role models?
No, I don't. There needs to be many more, especially in our schools, where a lot of our young children spend a majority of their days. For one thing, not only can I be a good role model, but having a strong footage and a strong hold on my own traditions, and being able to have this spiritual grasp that I do, and a belief and a respect for myself, I can then give that respect to the children. And I think by role modeling that, it can be of more benefit, because they can actually see it happening in their life.
Robert Bird, who is the producer of the documentary, the wonderful documentary you saw tonight, says he has something to say.
Well, I'm just kind of curious. I strive to present positive images in this piece because I think that the images we're so accustomed to seeing aren't so positive. And I'm kind of curious about how people feel about those images, how they feel about the way, Native people, about the way that they've been presented in the past.
And if it's changed at all.
Yeah. Yes.
I grew up in North Minneapolis, where we had a lot of Native Americans, and at that time we just accepted we were Indians. We didn't know there was something more deeper. And we talk about Franklin Avenue, and that was an image that people had. These were Indians. Indians were the kind of people that hung on Franklin Avenue. And it's not, and after being criticized through white Americans and other things for being interested in Indians, reading up on them, trying to study, and then share those things that I learned, like through book reports and stuff like that, and being criticized for it openly, kind of put me backwards. And now I am 36 years old, trying to find my roots. What really is an Indian? An Indian isn't just a drunk walking down the street. There is something, and you say a culture, it's a religion. It's not. We've learned it's a way of life. It's of living, it's of sharing, and it's a pride that we carry inside us. And many of us young growing up have absolutely no idea of that. There's no basis. In those years of growing up, our parents denied that. They believed it was shameful to be Indians. Even though I was proud till I experienced the shame myself growing up. Now I go back, and I'm looking for it, and I'm proud.
To shift gears slightly, in Bemidji there has been some very ugly and well-publicized displays of racism, despite that being a place where a lot of Native people live. Do you feel as though racism is just about at a level and it just kind of stays there? Does it get worse? Does it get better? Are people becoming more educated? We have a new generation of kind of more activist Native American people. Are they becoming more well received in your community?
Yeah, I don't know if racism and discrimination are more prevalent here than any other place in the state, including the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. I think the American Indian population here is very quick to confront racism and discrimination in any form. I think the Indian students at Bemidji State University have been very active in promoting cultural diversity and their own American Indian heritage. As an Indian educator, I've never thought that Indian students have to give up their Indianness to acquire an education. I'm seeing over the last 8 years at Bemidji State University a lot of our Indian students doing some really wonderful things within their community once they get out of Bemidji State University. They're going back to their reservations and their communities to work. So I've never believed that you have to give up your Indianness to receive an education, a higher education.
You know, when I said the word racism, about 6 people automatically jerked up their hands that wanted to say something on that issue very, very much. Where were some of those hands that I saw?
We have one person over here.
Well, you pointed out Bemidji, and I think that that's kind of a red herring. There was some good news coverage of trouble, but I'm from northern Wisconsin, and we have tremendous racist tendencies there from my people, the European Americans. And I think on the broader questions that have been raised here, one thing that keeps coming up in my mind is that the invading people, the European Americans who came in and took the wealth and amassed the wealth and hoarded in a very materialistic way, are the ones that to some degree are going to have to confront our own greed and be able to learn the Native American traditions of sharing if we're going to survive as a nation. Because those little blips you see about racism come up once in a while, but we don't get to the core problems like the fact that a very small population of white people control the mass amount of wealth, and this leads to all sorts of abrasiveness between peoples, mostly between poor people and the very few rich people.
Jim Northwood, I'm interested in what you think about that. You used the term culture vultures in our documentary. Do you think that people with a European heritage can understand, can we get it? After all the things that we've gotten wrong over the years?
You got most of everything now. But if you want to learn our spirituality, if you approach us in a respectful way, we'll share. We'll share even though you use it to make money or you use it for your own purposes, we'll share. But you just can't, it's not a Kmart kind of an operation. You have to spend years and years and years studying it. And there are always plenty of people to teach you. But it's not Kmart.
Everything that people have been discussing here is a need for education and, of course, for information to get out, not only to educate ourselves and see that our children have a clear good education about their culture and their spiritual traditions, but equipping them with the skills that they need to survive in two worlds as well. But I think one of the important things, and the producer asked a question earlier about the content of this particular program focusing on these 3 individuals. And the question was, is this a good program? This forum, this particular format, this town meeting is a good program. The 3 segments on that we viewed earlier, there's not enough of that. There's not enough good positive television telling our story.
And you know what?
I'm
afraid that that's about all the time.
It's very important to do that.
That's all the time for our discussion tonight, unfortunately. Thanks to our guests in the studio and at the studios of KAWE in Bemidji, and to the callers who got through. I'll be back with some final words in just a moment. Well, we hope you found tonight's documentary and discussion enlightening, and we hope you continue the dialogue among yourselves and with us. Call to record your comments about tonight's program. The number to our answering machines is 612-229-1430. Next week, KTCA Reports will feature a startling look at the threat of lead poisoning to our children, and we'll tell you what you can do about it. We invite you to join us then. In the meantime, remember to call us. The number again is 612-229-1430. Thanks again to all our guests. For Tom Beaver, I'm Kevin Berger. Good night.
Major funding for this edition of KTCA Reports is provided by the McKnight Foundation, responding to the needs of individuals and communities. The Pillsbury Foundation, focusing on programs serving children and youth at risk, and the Northwest Area Foundation. Additional funding is provided by the James R. Thorpe Foundation, the Grotto Foundation, and by the Archie D. and Bertha H. Walker Foundation.